or anything. Not like I really care. I can just announce this, although not that many people are going to join because the server is kind of like unopened and so forth. But I mainly just wanted to debate people for the sake of getting content. Really, that's all. So it's not like a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really care whether or not you announce it.
Yeah, gotcha. Sure. Let me just announce this. Whomever joins, just joins. It doesn't matter. I'm not gonna invite people to the server or anything for this debate. There we go. Yeah, so a lot of people have been telling me that I should talk to you about my argument for God and so forth because they think you'd be the perfect person to attack the argument. And we've already talked about the argument previously, right? So what really would be your objections be to the argument insofar as the concepts or the premises are concerned?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure what the argument is, right? So I just want to see the set of premises and the conclusion, right, that constitute the argument.
Well, the argument is just basically, I don't have it formalized on me right now, but what I can tell you is that I think it trivially follows from the concept of existence that all things that are things would actually exist. And there are different types of existences.
All right, so wait, is that the first premise?
Well, you could say so. So for anything X, it's either mind dependent or mind independent, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Would you grant this premise?
Yeah, what's the next premise?
Okay, so we know that God is a thing, right? Like God is identified to be a thing. Some people might even argue that he's a fictional thing or a non-existent thing. It doesn't really matter what it is, but God is a thing.
Wait a minute. What's the domain of quantification?
When you say domain of quantification, what does that mean in this context?
Yeah, so a domain of quantification is just a range of objects that you're quantifying over, right? So for instance, right, let's say I say something like for all x is a dog, right? That would be true if the domain of quantification, right, was such that it only included dogs, right? But it would be false if the domain of quantification, right, included, for instance, say it was an actual world model, right? So it just includes every object that exists. So I'm just asking, right, what the domain of quantification is, right, with respect to...
For the first premise regarding the idea for all things X, it's either mind dependence or mind independence or for something else.
Yeah, I'm asking what the domain of quantification is with respect to the argument.
I think the domain of quantification would just specifically be the set of all things, right? And you shouldn't treat set in this case. Yeah, just to be clear on a couple of things. The word set there shouldn't be taken literally the mathematical concept. Just using set in this sort of conventional way, which is supposed to reflect all possible things or all things really. That's
okay. So the domain is all things, right? And so is that going to include non-existent things?
I don't think non-existent things is something which is even a coherent concept.
Right. Okay. So then we'll just assume. Okay. So the domain of quantification, we'll just say it's things. Then we're taking it to be baked into the concept of a thing that exists. Okay. So then the second premise is God is a thing. Okay. So then what's the third premise?
The third premise is simply that if God was to be mind dependent, then there's a contradiction entailed from God being mind dependent. Right. The contradiction being that given the definition of God and God being an omnipotent being, which entails being the first cause, it is the case that if he is to be mind dependent, then you would not be the first cause. It's kind of like saying, well, we have a bachelor, and the bachelor by definition is an unmarried man. However, you can have a situation in which this bachelor was to be married. There's a contradiction given the definition, and so it creates a contradiction in the formal system.
All right, what's the...
What's up?
Wait, hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's up?
Yeah, what's the fourth premise?
The fourth premise is, well, considering that we've already established, or I've established rather, that God could not be mind dependent, then it has to be the case that God is mind dependent, granted the first premise. And so if God is mind independent, then God is a part of the external objective reality, and so God exists, right? Just trivially.
So the fourth premise is God is mind independent, and then what's the fifth?
Yeah, the fifth premise would just simply be that, well, not even the fifth premise, but rather it would be the case that the conclusion would be that God exists objectively, right? I could provide the formalized argument somewhere. Give me 1 second. Hold on.
Wait.
Just to make sure that it is well intact.
Wait a minute. Do you sign off on the argument that you just gave being sound?
If you're talking about sound insofar as it is formally valid, I don't sign off on that specifically.
You don't sign off on the argument you gave being valid?
Logically sound, yeah, and logically valid, but I'm not sure about formally valid. Do you think it is the case that an argument has to be? Do you think it is the case that it has to be formally valid for it to be logically valid?
Argument? Don't dodge the question.
Yes or no? Do you think it is the case that an argument has to be formally valid for it to be logically valid?
Do you have a sound argument? Yes or no? Don't run away.
I said yes. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think it is the case, yes or no, that an argument has to be formally valid for it to be logically valid? Yes or no? Yes or no? Answer the question. Yes or no? What's the answer? Yes or no? Do you think an argument has to be logically valid? Do you think an argument has to be formally valid for it to be logically valid? Answer the question. Answer the question. Yes or no? Yes or no? You're spazzing out. You're panicking, dog. What's going on? You're literally panicking right now. Answer the question. Answer the question. I've already said yes. You're not listening. The answer is yes. Now answer my question. Do you think it is the case that for any argument which is logically sound, it has to be formally valid? Answer the question. Yes or no? Answer the question. Answer the question. Answer the question. He's saying I'm dodging that he's literally dodging my question. I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you think an argument has to be formally valid for it to be logically sound? Yes or no? Yes or no? So I'm going to take that as a no. And so if it is a no, by the way, then there's no specific requirement for an argument to be formally valid for it to be logically sound. What do you think you're doing right now? Eric, what are you doing? What are you doing, kid? You're having a meltdown right now for no reason. I want you to answer my question. I want you to answer my question, though. Do you believe it is the case that an argument has to be logically? Do you think it is the case that for an argument to be logically sound, it has to be formally valid? Answer the question, dog. I'm waiting.
Yes, for an argument to be sound.
Why are you stumbling? Just answer my question, you coward. Answer my question, you dishonest coward. Stop spazzing out. Just answer my question.
I just said yes.
You're saying that. You're asking me, are you okay? When you're literally panicking right now. What are you talking about? That's my question.
I just said yes, retard. I just said yes for the fourth time.
What's the justification? What's the justification? Wait, you think it is the case? You think it is the case that formal validity is a necessary condition for an argument to be logically valid? Answer the question. Answer the question. Do you think it is the case that an argument has to be formally valid for it to be logically valid? Do you think these two things are the same by definition? Do you think these two things are the same by definition? Answer the question. You're panicking. Eric, you're panicking. What are you doing? Eric, you're panicking. I don't fault you for not knowing this because you've not done the research and argumentation years. I'm going to ask you one more time. I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you take it to be the case that by definition, formal validity and logical validity are identical? Answer the question. Answer the question. Dog, you're literally sprinting away from every single question I'm asking because you know for a fact you don't have the knowledge or the intellect to even grasp what's even going on in the conversation. You're completely clueless. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Dog, are you going to stop right now? Eric, stop. What are you doing, Eric? Eric, relax. Relax. You're spazzing out. You're having a panic attack, Eric. Eric, take your meds, bro. It's not that deep. It's not that deep. Just relax for a second. Just calm down. Calm down. Are you calm? Are you calm now, Ape? Are you stop aping out? Are you going to stop aping out? Got you. Yeah, finally the ape calmed down. Finally the ape calmed the fuck down. So I'm going to re-ask the question which you forgot the first couple of times. So is it the case, yes or no, that you take it to be true by definition that formal validity and logical validity are identical? Yes or no?
No, I don't take the view they're identical. I take the view that validity is
okay, so why is it the case that formal validity is an indispensable condition for an argument to be logically sound?
Because it's a necessary condition on the standard usage.
Why are you so confused about the very basic concept, you autist? Answer the question. Answer my question. Yes or no? I ask a yes or no question, by the way. I ask a yes or no question, by the way. What are you doing?
But you're going to run away. You're never going to engage.
What's up with the fake cold flash? Just answer the question. Do you think it is the case? Do you think it is the case that formal validity is a necessary, indispensable condition for logically sound arguments?
Yes, it is on the standard definition. That's what I just said.
But you literally just conceded that's not the case. But you conceded the opposite because you agree that logical validity is not identical to formal validity. So you can have an argument which is logically valid, which is not formally valid, retard. Are you stupid? Why are you confused, bro? Why are you confused about the basic concepts, Eric? What's going on with your brain today, man? Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you mentally challenged? Like, answer my question. Answer my question. Are you mentally challenged? Are you mentally challenged, Eric? Erik? What's going on, bro?
Premise?
What's going on? You're spazzing out right now. So answer my question. So specifically, you agree. You agree that formal validity is not identical to logical validity, and so in other words, you have to literally agree that it is not the case that an argument has to be formally valid for the argument to be logically sound, because the indispensable condition, by definition, for an argument to be logically sound is for it to be logically valid and not formally valid. Retard. So you fucked yourself on the front.
Wait, what do you think logical
You
validity
fucked yourself on your own point, dog. You want to move on to a different point?
Logical validity is, Apollo?
Do you want to move on to a different point?
Shit, you're gonna run away. What do you think logical
Dog, you're
validity is?
literally running away from my objections. What are you talking about? You haven't even addressed my objections right now, and you're criticizing me, you're accusing me of running away.
You're a 2D object.
Do you think these low-tier Jedi mind tricks are going to work on the audience? Do you think these low-tier Jedi mind tricks are going to work on the audience?
Genuinely. Because you're significantly below me.
Dog, you're literally trying to use Jedi mind tricks. It's not even working. Not a single person is convinced by this trash you talk on display by you right now. I don't even know what you're trying to do right now. What are you even trying to do, bro? What are you even trying to do right now? Everyone is literally listening to you as a background noise right now, like unironically. What are you doing? What are you doing? I'm not even trying to be rhetorical. You're rhetorically blowing apart to this conversation, bro. Just answer my question. Just answer my question. Do you think it is the case by definition? Do you think it is the case by definition? Formal validity is identical to logical validity. Your answer was no. You don't think it is identical by definition. So if you think that to be the case, then clearly you have to concede the proposition that you can have an argument which is logically sound, even if the argument is not formally valid, retard.
Try number one. Right. What is the first premise?
Do you want to take turns, retard?
All right, so that's a dodge. So what's the first premise?
Do you want to turns, retard?
I understand
You're
sprinting
with every single objection I've been given so far, by the way.
Premise?
I don't even know why you're peeing your peeing adult diapers right now,
So
because you cannot even adjust the arguments you've given. What are you doing, bro? What are you doing? Do you need the pacifier? Do you need the pacifier? Do you need the pacifier? I'm waiting for the actual objection, by the way, dog.
I don't know why you're not answering the question right now.
I don't know why you're stuttering, bro. Just answer my argument. Respond to my argument. What are you doing, Erik?
What's the first
Separate game up, retard. Lock the fucking dipshit. Lock the fucking dipshit. Answer my question. Do you think it is the case that given the agreements you've made, it would be consistent with the proposition that it is the case that logical soundness requires formal validity? Yes or no?
Yes.
Holy fucking shit, he's confused.
Wait, do you disagree?
You think it is the case that facts would be consistent? You're retarded.
No
yes or no? Do you agree? Yes or no? Was it the case? Yes or no? Was it the case he granted it? Was it the case he granted the distinction between formal validity and logical validity? Yes or no? Do you agree those are semantically different? Do you agree there was a semantic distinction between formal validity and logical validity? Yes or no? Did you grant this? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. You granted this dumb fuck. So moving on, retard. If you grant that to be the case, and it's established by definition that the thing which is required for an argument to be logically sound is for it to be logically valid and not formally valid, then your previous claim was incorrect.
Wait, by formally valid, I just mean logically valid, dipshit. Wait, are you not tracking?
You literally said on record. We can roll back the clip. We can roll back the clip. We can roll back the clip. You agree they're different. You agree they're different. You stated that formal validity and logical validity are not identical. What are you talking about? You brain dead moron. You subhuman filth. You agree to the contrary. You can't say that they're true or they're identical by definition if you agree they're different on the same recording. You're stuttering right now. You're panicking. Now I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to do this one more time. If you agree that they are different, then you cannot say that by definition they're identical. That's a contradiction, moron. What are you doing?
Wait, yeah, when I said yeah to acknowledge what you said, that's distinct from me.
No, it wasn't a yeah to acknowledge, it was a yeah to agree. What are you doing? Now these dishonest are trying to play word games by saying, yeah, that didn't mean I was agreeing with it. I just acknowledged what you were saying.
Yeah, do you think validity is a condition? Wait a minute. Do you think validity is a condition for soundness?
Ignore the fact that you conceded in the proposition.
Do you think that formal validity is a condition for soundness, Apollo? Yes or no? That's a dodge. Do you agree that formal validity is a condition for soundness?
He's dodging my points right now.
Do you take the view that formal validity is a condition for soundness, Apollo? I know this is a difficult question. Holy fuck, this is a hard one for a retard like you. Right now, Apollo's dodging the question as to whether or not logical validity or formal validity is a condition for soundness, which, by the way, are just fucking interchangeable. Holy shit, this is an insanely bad look.
Do you think this is rhetorically powerful? Answer my
I'm
question.
insanely rhetorically powerful. Yes, I think I'm stopping you in this discussion. Yes, I'm insanely rhetorically powerful.
Anyways,
And by the way, everything that I say sounds like
So
to you because you're fucking retarded.
the idea that
You're
they are
getting
different.
dog walked
You
right
in
now.
fact acknowledge that it is the case that logical
You in fact
validity is
acknowledge
necessary for logical
Apollo,
soundness.
what's the
So
first
that
premise?
inherently fucks over your own position,
What's the
where you
first
made a
premise, Apollo?
preposterous, ridiculous claim that
What's
it is
the first
necessary for
premise?
an argument to
Right,
be
so now
formally
what we're
valid
gonna
for it to be
do, right,
logically
so what
valid.
we're gonna do is we're gonna put a 1 in chat for
What we're
every
gonna do is
Apollo
we're gonna put a
dodge, right?
leash
So
around the
what's
monkey
the
Erik
first
and
premise?
drag him back to the original point.
Alright, so that's an Apollo
That's
dodge.
to actually
Right,
address
so
the
what's
argument.
the first
So
premise?
I'm gonna just attach the
Right,
leash
so
onto it,
that's an
Erik.
Apollo
Okay, so just
dodge,
come
right?
back
So
here,
what's
Erik.
the first
Just
premise?
come back here. I'm gonna drag you
So
to this
that's an
point.
Apollo
Okay.
dodge. So what's the
Is it the
first
case?
premise?
You believe it to be
So
true
that's an
by
Apollo
definition
dodge. So
that
what's
these
the
two things are
first
identical
premise?
despite you being
So
the
that's an
contrary.
Apollo dodge.
Yes or
I
no?
can just farm dodges
Yes
off
or
of
no?
you.
I'm
This is
asking
so
you a basic
easy.
yes or
I
no
can just, it's
question.
like what I do with
Erik, no
retarded
one is
people in
interested
PNR
in your
when I
TED
keep
talk.
on asking them the
No
same
one is
question, and I
interested
can
in your
count
TED talk.
dodges with
Stop
them
giving us the
endlessly
TED talk. We're
because
just
I
here about the
understand the
yes or
fact
no.
that they're
Just give a yes or
incapable of
no.
engaging on the
Stop giving a
substantive
TED
level
talk.
that
Just
I'm
give a
engaging in.
yes or no
I've
to my
put the
question,
question on the
dog.
table so
Give
many
a
different
yes
times,
or no
and
to my
you've been
question.
incapable of
Give a
answering it
yes
due
or
to
no
the
to my
fact that you're
question.
so fucking retarded and
Dog,
that
what
you're
are
so
you doing? You're
rhetorically
just
and
spazzing out.
dialectically inept
This is
that
like
no
one of the
matter
most
how much, no matter
atrocious
how
rhetorical
frequently I
performances I've
give you an
ever heard from
opportunity
you,
to
by the
dig
way.
yourself out
I
of the
think you should
rhetorical
just
hole
look
that you
back
put
onto
you
this
like
conversation
yourself in this
and reflect on
conversation,
how
you'll
trash
never,
your rhetoric
ever,
actually
ever get
was,
out
how
of it,
trash
Apollo.
and dog
Because
shit
not
your
only are you so
argumentation was, and then
substantively
go on a
inept, but
training
you're
knock and then come
incapable
back
of keeping
after.
track of
Because
any point that I make
genuinely, if
whatsoever
you
throughout the
think for
course of
some
the
reason
discussion,
this is an
but you're so
impressive
rhetorically
performance,
inept
then
that you're
you're delusional.
incapable of weaseling
Then
your
you're
way out of it.
delusional.
So we have
I
a
don't even know
continual
why you're
cycle
under
of
the
you
false
losing and
impression
losing
you're
and
doing good
losing and
optimally in
losing
this
in this
conversation,
discussion,
but you really
trying
aren't.
desperately
You
to
really are
control the
doing good right now.
conversation as it's falling out of your
Dog, what
pathetic
are you
fucking
doing?
grasp. Let's get an
He's
answer
still
the question,
aping out.
Apollo. Nobody here
Holy
has the
yeah.
slightest interest in hearing
Holy
you
fucking
continually
heck, he's still
dodge, right?
aping
The
out.
question's been put on the
He's
table
still
a plethora
going.
of different times,
He's
which you
still
haven't
going.
fucking answered.
And
What's
he's
the
still
first premise
going.
of the argument that you
He's
claimed you
still
had?
going.
Where that
Oh
argument was sound,
no.
dipshit.
He's having a schizophrenic
Oh, he's not
meltdown right now.
answer.
You're having a schizophrenic
This is the
meltdown right now.
easiest
Are you
debate I've
okay?
ever had.
Are
And
you
by the way,
okay?
claiming I had a
Are you
schizophrenic
okay?
meltdown
You're still
isn't
having a
even
meltdown.
remotely rhetorical
You're still
when
having a
every real
meltdown.
intelligent person in
I'm
this
still
VC is
waiting for you
keeping
to
track of
actually
what I'm
object to
saying,
the argument,
keeping
by the
track
way. Are
of
you going
how
to object to the argument,
dismantling
or are
the
you going to
dumb
keep on
fuck shit
yapping?
that
Which
you
one
keep
is it?
on saying in the
Are you going to
conversation
object to
and
the argument,
concluding
or are
as
you
a
going to keep
result
on
of that
yapping?
that
Which one
you're
is it?
dodging. I'm
Which one
sorry,
is it?
but continually
Object
making
to the
rhetorical
argument right
jabs
now.
when you're
Give a
so
counter
fucking
argument.
dog shit
Give a
at them
counter
doesn't
argument.
make you have
Give a
any
counter
higher of a
argument.
dialectical
So
standing in the
many
conversation,
insults.
especially considering
So
the
many
fact that you're
insults
fucking
and zero
sweating. Sweat is
arguments
beading
back
off of
into
your
it.
forehead right now because this is the
So
worst
many
debate
insults
performance
and
that you've
zero
ever had.
arguments.
And when you
This
upload this
guy
on the
has
channel, every
so much
single person is going
confidence
to
and
see
so
that you
very
have
little
all these
intelligence.
low-level
It's really
dog walk
embarrassing.
dipshit
It's really
conclusions.
embarrassing. What
It's
are you
so
doing
easy
right
to
now, dog?
continually
You're just
get one over on
trashing
you
out.
because all you do
This
is
guy's
professionally lose
manifesting in
debates.
the
You
voice now
lost a
because he
synth,
has no
you're losing to me
argumentation.
right now,
That's
and
crazy,
you just
bro.
go around
That's
and
actually
professionally lose
crazy. You
discussions.
don't have the
You're on a
rhetoric. You don't have the
continual, endless
argumentation.
reverse
You don't have
gauntlet
any
where you
sort of
upload debates
proper
of you
dialectical
losing on
ability to
your
even
channel
address the
because you're
argument. You're
getting
just
blown the fuck out continuously.
outmatched
And
in
you're
this
so socially
conversation.
inept that you're
And you,
incapable of telling
you
that
for a
all of your
fact, you're
followers, or at least the ones who
way
are
out of
genuine,
depth
are
in this
people who don't
conversation.
genuinely
I
think you're
don't even know where
intelligent
this
at
is
all,
going right
but
now.
people who follow
I
you
don't even know
just
where
to
this is
troll
going
you.
right
You're
now.
a low
At this
Apollo,
moment, you're
you're
just
retarded.
losing
Right, just
loudly
answer
instead of
the
actually
question.
addressing
Every
the
single
point.
person who wants to tune in to hear
What are
the
you doing,
first
bro?
premise of the argument
What are
that
you
you claim
doing,
you
Erik?
have, right? What is the
What are
first
you doing,
premise?
Erik? Holy
What's the
shit,
first
what are you doing?
premise? Just more dodges. What's the
He
first
says more
premise?
dodges as
So
he's
what
literally
I'm
getting
gonna
blown
do
the
is I'm
fuck
gonna
out of this
count 10
conversation.
dodges from
God
the
damn it,
retard,
that's so
right? And then
embarrassing.
after we
That's
get
so
10
crazy.
dodges, right? Which by the way, we've already gotten in the past. I'm gonna go back to rhetoric and
Dog,
I'm gonna stomp
are you
him on the
okay?
rhetoric again as
Are
I've
you
been
okay?
doing throughout the
He's
course of this
literally still
conversation.
going. I'm
So
still waiting for
let's
you to
try
object the
Apollo.
argument.
Let's try with the
I'm still
retard. What's
waiting
the
for you to
first
object the
premise?
argument. So, do you even remember the last point of
All
giving to
right,
this
so that's a
conversation?
dodge.
Yes
So
or
what's
no?
the first
Do you remember
premise?
the last point of giving to
All
this
right, so
conversation?
that's
Yes or
another
no?
dodge. So what's
That's
the
a
first
deep
premise?
dodge, by the way, on Erik's end,
So
by the way.
that's
You're
another
just
another
dodging
dodge, right? And
every
we'll call
single
that the
one of my
question
yes
dodge,
or no
where what he
questions
does
because
is
you
he
have no
dodges my
proper
question
rebuttal.
by asking
You have
his own,
no proper
thinking that if he
justification
asks
for your
his own
claims. You have
question,
no
when it
proper
comes after
actual
mine, will
idea
give
to
him the
actually
appearance of
present to
being
the
even
conversation,
remotely
which is
linear,
going to
as he's
increase
in the middle of
productivity per
attempting to
se.
derail a line of
You're just an
questioning, dipshit.
unproductive
Right, so let's
bastard who
try
just
again.
cannot debate
Right, this is
topic and
try
just
number
spend his
4.
whole
Right,
time
what is the
aping
first
the fuck
premise?
out because he's
All
no
right,
actual
so that's another
argumentation.
dodge. So try
I'm going
number
to wait
5,
and give
what's
you
the first
another chance
premise?
to redeem yourself.
Okay, so
I'm
try
going to
number
give you
6, what's the
another
first
chance to
premise?
redeem yourself.
So
So
try
first,
number
yes or
7, what's the
no?
first
Could you
premise?
repeat back to me my
Try
argument
number 8,
specifically in
what's
this
the first
conversation?
premise?
Yes or no?
Try number
Repeat
9,
back.
what's the
So
first
could you repeat
premise?
back to me my most
Try
recent
number
argument
10,
in
what's
this
the first premise?
conversation?
Wait, why is this
Yes or
so
no?
easy? Holy fuck. I
Yes
said
or
earlier in this
no?
conversation that I could
Eric, you're
continually
looking
dodge
mad right now.
from dodging off
Eric,
of
you're
you,
looking
and it's
terrible
so
right now.
fucking
What are you
easy to
doing?
do. Holy
What are
shit.
you
As
doing?
I've said, it's exactly like, yeah, I know
And
you're incredibly
he's still
confused about me
crashing
blowing
out,
the
bro.
fuck out of you in this conversation because you're incapable of having the slightest bit of
Do you
social
want to
awareness.
go? Do you
So
want to
what
take
I
turns
just
now
did,
because you're
I'll
aping
answer
out
your
right
question.
now? We
So
can
what
take
I'm
turns,
doing
but
right
I
now
don't
is
think the
pointing
base
out
is
the
even
fact that you just
interested
dodged
in
the
you just
question 10
aping out
times
the
in a row,
entire time of
but
the
nonetheless, you're
conversation.
attempting to
So
posture
just to
because
be
you're
clear in a
so
couple of
socially
things, just
unaware
to be clear
that
in a
you're
couple of things,
incapable of
hold on,
telling
just to be
that
clear in a couple of things. What we can do, Eric, is we can take turns. You're gonna blow the fuck out in the rhetoric,
What we
and
can
I don't
do.
think anyone's gonna care about the spaz out. So, no, hold on. What I'm gonna do is when he talks, I'm gonna make sure I mute myself, and when I talk, I'm gonna make sure he's muted. Okay? So regarding the points you made specifically, You said, when I asked you, do you agree that formal validities are different from, you said logical validity? You said it is the case that they are different. You said, yeah, they are different. Then afterwards, you said they are identical by definition. They're the same thing by definition. Now, that's a contradiction. And then you try to change your position from you saying, yeah, I do in fact agree that they are different, to you saying, no, I was just acknowledging the question and not agreeing to the idea that they are different, which, by the way, is another actual prevarication from the fact you conceded the point, which entails a contradiction. Not to mention, by definition, formal validity is not identical to logical validity, so I don't even know where to get that from. You can have an informal argument, you can have an informal argument, which is logically valid. Insofar as it is the case that the premises of the informal argument necessitates the conclusion be true under the presumption that the premise is actually correct, even if it is the case that the formal structure of the argument is nowhere to even be found because it is an informal argument. And all informal arguments, by definition, would be formally invalid. But you can have informal arguments which are logically valid insofar as the premises of the conclusion or the premise of the conclusion necessitates the conclusion being correct. So you can give a response now. There you go. Go for it, bitch boy.
Go for it, bitch boy. Yeah, I understand why you'd want to move to talking stick, because when it was both of us speaking unmoderated, you were incapable of keeping up. I was able to continuously farm doges off of you, and what you would do, because you're so socially unaware, is allow me to continue to farm doges off of you, right? This is one of the easiest debates I've ever had. Again, all you have in this conversation is you, after dodging my question, asking me a question about whether or not formal and logical validity are the same, and me saying yeah to acknowledge that question, right, while simultaneously dodging a question that's been put on the table a plethora of different times, which is, what's the first premise? I'm happy to wrap this debate up because, as I've said, this is one of the easiest ones I've ever had. I was saying this earlier in the conversation, but this is like a two-dimensional object seeing a three-dimensional object, right? Right now, you're incapable of seeing the actual shape of my substance. You're incapable of seeing the actual shape of my rhetoric. So all you're seeing is something like a cheap, distorted imitation, which, by the way, you are of me. You go around stealing my rhetorical tactics and running them worse, which leads everyone to think that you're a more retarded version of me with a retard accent who says retarded things and who acts retarded in conversations, as you've been doing throughout the entire course of our discussion. I'm sorry, the fact that I'm more articulate than you, the fact that I'm more rhetorical than you, the fact that I have better substance than you has all culminated. It's all come together in this debate to form this dunk that I've gotten on you, right? I've put the question on the table numerous different times. Every single time you've dodged the question, and the reason you keep on dodging is because the thing that you're the most scared of, other than rhetoric, which, by the way, you're fucking terrified of, you had to like server mute me, is substance, is actually answering a question, is actually thinking, doing something that utilizes like the slightest bit of your cognitive capacities, because I know that you don't even have the slightest amount of them. You've been rhetorically like spinning back kicks to the head. I've painted a beautiful fucking Mona Lisa in this debate, and you've painted fucking Van Gogh's last self-portrait. And the reason that you've painted Van Gogh's last self-portrait is because all you have is a cheap, distorted image of what the actual person is, right? You're a cheap, distorted image of me. And I think you've been blown the fuck out in every single sense of the word. On rhetoric, you've been blown the fuck out. On substance, you've been blown the fuck out. You've been blown the fuck out in terms of articulation. You've been blown the fuck out in the sense that you need to have all of these other people hop in to try to rescue your dog shit rhetorical performance, saying, or just wrap it up, right? So yeah, in conclusion, I think you've been blown the fuck out, and it's not just because you're stupid, but it's because your points are bad and you're stupid.
Okay.
Yeah, so now that he's done yapping, let me serve him for a second.
Idiot.
No, just a couple of things. He was talking about the idea that when there's just going back and forth, he was rhetorically blowing me out. It was pretty crazy for you to say that because literally in that same part of the conversation, you're busy starting over your fucking words like a retard, just to be clear on that part. It's also really ironic for you to be talking about articulation when you've been stumbling, even in your little monologue a while ago, you were literally starting over the word fucking painting or whatever. So I don't even know what you're talking about in that specific part. But if you want to talk about articulation, then it's pretty conspicuous that on articulation, just raw articulation, you're completely outmatching this conversation. On raw argumentation, you're also completely outmatching this conversation. And you spent literally the entirety of the monologue session that you had a while ago, the entirety of the TED talk, not even addressing the fucking arguments. Now I can give you a pretty obvious example of a situation in which an argument is in fact formally invalid, but an argument is by definition logically valid. So in the case scenario where you have like the first premise being Socrates is a man, right? And then you say a conclusion, Socrates is a part of the male species. It is the case that such an argument is logically valid. However, it would not be formally valid because there's no inference rule which structures the argument for it to be considered to be formally valid. So for example, if you were to put that in prop logic, that P implies Q and that's it. So it's just one premise, right? The premise being that Socrates is a man and the conclusion being Q, the conclusion being that Socrates is a part of the male species. So in that specific argument, you have an argument which is formally, right, invalid. But the argument itself is logically valid insofar as granting the premise, you dumb fucking subhuman filth, it entails the conclusion being correct. The conclusion being that it would be the case that Socrates is a part of the male species. You ramble on and on about rhetoric, but we know for a fact, and you even told me before, that you literally freaking watch Bosch debates and freaking write fucking scripts with the goons. You're literally reading off a script right now, and even after reading off a script, reading off a freaking paper right now, you're still looking bad optically in the conversation. You're still looking bad on the overall dialectical performance of the conversation, and you're talking about the whole idea of you having better rhetoric. That's one of the craziest delusions that you could ever fucking possibly have. The other one of the craziest delusions you could possibly fucking have is you believing that you sound fucking intelligent when you're making the claim that by definition, by your own stupid, retarded definition, you pulled out the stinky anus, by the way, it would be the case that formal validity and logical validity are identical, which, by the way, I've kind of trapped you on this because originally you realized that it is not the case that they're identical and you agree they're different. You said, yes, they are different. I ask you, do you agree, yes or no, that formal validity and logical validity, are the types of things which are in fact identical, right? And you said, no, they're not identical. You agreed they are different, right? So if you agree with they are different, which you did, by the way, then it would be the case that for you to say that by definition they are identical, that would be retarded. That would be a contradiction to your own position, a contradiction to your previous proposition. And you failed to realize that because of a goldfish fucking memory, and you're so fucking stupid and retarded, and the lost cause to the point where you're unable to even spot your own contradictions and spot and realize the facts that you're getting blown the fuck out completely in this conversation, to the extent where it's really ironic for you to even claim with a confident fucking face that you're actually winning this conversation. Now I'm going to see if you're going to keep on rambling and spazzing the fuck out and spend 30 fucking minutes in a TED talk of a whole bunch of scripted insults you prepared before this conversation, or you're going to actually be an intelligent human being and not the fucking subhuman monkey and stop aping the fuck out and give an actual argumentative response to the points I'm making and stay on the fucking substance, you bitch boy. So you can give the response now. That's it.
I have so much more articulation than you. I mean, look, was anyone taking that even slightly seriously when he was like repeatedly saying, I have so much more articulation than you? The fact that you think you're better than me is a delusion. Is he saying it in the retard accent, right? He's saying it in the accent where it's almost nearly like incomprehensible what it is that he's saying. Right now, he keeps on kind of saying that I haven't replied to the substantive points, right? And the dumb fuck goon, right, is also saying that I haven't responded to the substantive points, right? So I'll just repeat the same exact response. Right, so the response to the substantive point, right, which is that I contradicted myself, like with respect to thinking that logical validity is formal validity, right? The point that I've made is that it's not clear that I contradicted myself, right? The only kind of evidence he has for that claim, right, is me saying, yeah, to acknowledge a dipshit thing that he said, right? And furthermore, suppose that I did contradict myself, right? That wouldn't be answering the question, right? Because what I was asking is what the first premise is of the logically valid, right, and the formally valid argument, right? And notice that we never actually got the first premise of that argument. We were able to continually repeat that question throughout the entire course of the conversation. That's what I was talking about, by the way, with farming dodges. I could just keep on repeating it again, over and over and over and over again, and he'll never answer it, and he's never going to answer it. And the reason he's never going to answer it is because he thinks that he's like somehow got a victory on this point, which, by the way, he fucking didn't. So he's gonna keep on like continually trying to like claim a win while dodging the question that's been put on the table a plethora of different times. I don't know why we're talking about scripted insults right now when you're repeating the same exact insults that you've every single debate. Stop eating up right now, right? Like, so those sorts of kind of broken English, retarded insults, right, that people struggle to get through, right? You might be the least charismatic person that I've ever heard ramble throughout my entire life, right? Usually there's people who are like political pundits, for instance, or there's people who are, you know, in politics, or there's people who, you know, even speak about, you know, pretty complicated technical topics like physics, and it can be entertaining to listen to them speak about those topics. And the reason it is entertaining to hear some people speak about those topics is because they actually articulate themselves, is because they're actually charismatic, right? But when anybody hears you speak, when anyone hears you ramble in a debate, right, what they want is for the ramble to be over, right? Nobody has the slightest bit of interest in hearing, right, the retard say, oh, I have so much better articulation than you, right, as he's stumbling through his insults while accusing the other person of stumbling through their insults, right? I'm sorry, I would rather stutter at like a 10% rate, right, with respect to each word said, right, than speak the way that you do, right? I'd rather speak at the very articulate, very passionate, very high level that I speak at, right, and stutter 10% of the time, than speak at the level you speak at, where I'm speaking completely broken fucking English and slowly droning on, mumbling to myself in the background sound like some type of retard who has a plethora of different mental disabilities. So I replied to the substantive point, and as for the substantive point that I've put on the table, right, he's never going to engage with it, right? You're going to hear Apollo's entire ramble, and he's not going to tell us what the first premise is of the formally valid argument. And the reason, as I've said, that he won't tell us what it is because he thinks he has a victory over a side point, right? A side point that he didn't even win on, right? So he has a hyper pedantic point that he isn't even correct on, that he wants to stake the entire debate on, instead of engaging in good faith with the question that I've put on the table. You're fucking retard, Apollo. And by the way, right, an argument that's logically valid, if you're trying to say that, logical validity is a property of informal arguments, right, and formal arguments, and then formal validity is merely a property of formal arguments, right? If an argument is logically valid, retard, it'll have a fucking inference rule, right? So when I asked you what the inference rule is, right, and then you mentioned, oh, well, we're not talking about formal validity, right? Saying that we're not talking about formal validity isn't even answer the question, and asking the question about what the inference rule is, right, won't assume that we're talking about formal validity, right? So take the following natural language argument, right? If Apollo retardedly rambles in the retard voice, right, then Apollo's a retard, right? Apollo retardedly rambles in the retard voice, right? Therefore, Apollo's a retard, right? I just delivered that argument in natural fucking language, right? But notice how that argument has an inference rule, right? Namely, that argument is modus ponens, right? So similarly, right, if he doesn't want to say that he was rendering the argument formally, right, which is fine, right, we can get the argument, what the inference rule of the argument is informally, right, which, by the way, he's never actually going to do, right? So he's not going to tell us what the inference rules is of the original argument, right? He claims that he has an argument that's formally valid, right, in the sense of formal validity that he specified, right? And then when asked for the first premise of that argument, right, he's been continually dodging it, right? So I guess just to kind of cap it all off, right, what's going to happen is he's going to dodge the question concerning what the first premise is of the formally valid argument, right? And he's going to dodge the question concerning what the inference rule is of the argument that he originally gave, right? Instead of just saying, oh, well, it doesn't have to do with formal validity, right? We understand why that point is retarded, because an argument in the sense that he specified, right, where it can be formally valid but not logically valid, right? Or sorry, vice versa, right? Where it could be not logically valid, or not formally valid, but logically valid, right? Even in that sense, right? Logically valid arguments will have inference rules, right? Natural language arguments will have inference rules that are sound, right? And I just gave an exact example of that, right? So Apollo, right? Let's get an answer to the question, right? Number one, what's the inference rule of the argument that you already delivered, right? Since we understand that you delivering the inference rule, right, it's not a prerequisite of that for you to be giving the argument formally, right? And B, right, what's the first premise of the argument that you claimed that's formally valid, right? Now dodge it if you're my bitch.
Yeah, that's the part in fucking Caller's mid debate is so fucking embarrassing. Like, it's actually crazy how he talks about Paulie. You have broken English, bro. We can barely even fucking understand your points right now. Literally in the fucking chat, people are clowning your fucking speech. People are clowning your rhetoric. People are clowning your articulation. You're so fucking lacking in situational awareness. You can't even tell the fucking fact that you're rhetorically blown the parts of this conversation. You can't even tell the fact that you're so rhetorically uncharismatic to the point where you're unable to convince anyone in the audience you're actually optically dominant, despite the fact you're reading off a fucking script right now. Now, first and foremost, you made the claim, if an argument is logically valid, then it has an inference rule. I'm going to ask for the argument for that claim first and foremost, and then we're to debunk the proposition, you dumb fuck. If you're claiming that conditional sentence to be a strict implication insofar as it's going to necessarily follow from an argument being logically valid, that an argument is something which has an inference, that's fucking retarded. That's brain-dead as fuck, retard, because guess what? If given an instance, a counterexample, I'm not sure if you know what the counterexample actually is, considering how inept you're mentally speaking, but I gave a counterexample, an example which contradicts, which debunks, which falsifies your claim. That example being the idea of a case scenario where you have an argument, which is in fact logically valid, and by the way, define the word logically valid for you because you're so stupid and mentally challenged. And I won't fault you for not knowing this basic concept because it's very obvious in never anything on argumentation theory. But what it means for an argument to be logically valid in the field of argumentation theory is merely the idea that the premises of the argument, the set of premises, whether it's one premise, two premises, doesn't matter the amount of premises, entails the conclusion being correct. Just rendering it from not being a non sequitur, right? In this particular context, where they have Socrates as a man, therefore Socrates is a part of the male species. That's a logically valid argument. However, is the argument formally valid? No, you dumb fuck. There's no inference rule of the argument. The argument, if you're to put it in the formalized version, would just be P, therefore Q. That never comes out as formally valid because that's not an inference rule, you moron. The argument would only be something which is formally valid if you say something like, if Socrates is a man, then he's a part of the male species, and that's premise one. And then premise two, Socrates is a man, Therefore, conclusion, he's a part of the male species. The only reason as to why your whole responses, your whole script is something which revolves around, what's the inference here? What's the inference here? It's because you don't actually have any substance. You don't actually have any argumentation. So what you do is run the same cheap fucking ask yourself script you fucking stole from ask yourself to merely ignore and mask the fact you have no sort of relevant intelligence whatsoever in the actual subject's matter to give any actual counter arguments, to give any productive skeptical objections, by the way. And moving on from that, he talks about, I'm going to focus on the substance. Paula is dodging. You have literally dodged and evaded and prevaricated from the fact that you conceded on your own point. You fucked yourself up so badly. I even got second in embarrassment from that contradiction. You were literally like, actually grants that there are different logical validity and formal validity. And then moments later, your dumb fuck ass, which forgot the concession you made previously, said that by definition they are identical. And it's so great to have the recording just to play back this embarrassing moment from the supposed top tier debater who's supposedly better than the Paul named Erik over here, who just goes on his rhetorical TED Talk rants he practiced in the fucking mirror with his fucking nerdy voice. And by the way, really and truly, maybe they've came off as charismatic, maybe they've come off as rhetorical, maybe they've come off as persuasive if you had the voice changer on. And that's the only reason as to why I had to use a voice changer with your Eva Destiny account. Because when you actually hear your dumb fucking voice, your corny ass fucking voice, your virgin ass fucking voice, we realize that really and truly just a skinny fucking white we behind the fucking screen who can't pack, who does not have good rhetoric, who does not have good charisma, who doesn't have good articulation, who accuses me of having broken English because of a slight accent, despite the fact he is literally objectively worse English than I am, which is pretty obvious given the fact that he's literally struggling throughout his sentences each time he tries to pronounce a single word, and is losing at least 50 fucking calories with each word he tries to pronounce in this conversation. So I'm going to give you one more chance to actually address the points I'm given, and if you're going to fail again for the fourth time that the dumb fuck loser you are to address the argument, to object to the argument, to debunk the argument, then I'm going to move on from this point because I know I've pissed on you completely in this point, and we can get back to the substance regarding the previous point. And last but not least, you accused me, make the very, very wild accusation that I am pedantic, I'm going off points, because I can't address the main point. Dog, you literally brought this onto yourself, bro. You tried to be a pedantic princess on this point, talking about what else is for you? Then you got bitched the fuck out, you got slapped the living fuck out of you on this point, and then when that happened, you tried to cry about what's been in the sub point that you brought up because you got blown the fuck on this point, as you like to say, blow the fuck out. Really crazy, isn't it? And then afterwards, you're going to try to squirm away back from the sub points you brought up, which you're getting bitched on, to the main point, which you're going to still get bitched on. So, I mean, pick a struggle, man. Do you want to stay on the sub point, where is it getting dog walked on, or do you want to go back in the previous point, which you're getting ragdolled on? Pick a struggle. It's up to you, man. Where is the guy? Oh, there he is. Give her a TED Talk, retard. There you go. Let me just unmute him. Done.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's time for you to pick a struggle, right? Losing on substance and losing on rhetoric, because you've been doing that throughout the course of this debate. I mean, I think it's hilarious, by the way, when you talk about being charismatic. I'm sorry, I'm the people's champion, right? Everyone listens to me speak, right? And they listen, right? And the reason that they listen to me and they don't listen to you, right, is, as I've said, because it's clear to everyone, to every single competent person, that you're a fucking retard, right? We could go around to like Clubhouse or to any like space that has competent people in it, right? We could go through, right, and ask anyone who we both respect, right, and they're going to come away thinking that you're fucking retarded, right? So now let's kind of address, right, the silly points that you made, right? So you said that the form of the Socrates argument, right, would be something like P, Q, therefore R, right? And that would be the form in propositional logic. That's right, right? But presumably you wouldn't model that argument in terms of propositional logic, right? You'd think that that argument has something like, it has the inference rule of universal instantiation or universal modus ponens, right? So the example he gave saying, this proves a point, right? In that example, the exact example that he gave, there's an incredibly obvious inference rule that anyone who knew basic first order logic would know. In fact, there's two plausible inference rules, right, that you could use with respect to that argument, right, on which such that it's clearly an argument that's valid, right, and it's valid in the logical sense, right? Now, I mean, I'll just keep on, addressing the dumb fuck point that he made, because I think every single time I can just repeat my response to it, it weakens the force when he repeats the initial point, right? So yeah, just to repeat my response, response, right, it sounds like what Apollo's point is, right, is that I said, I grant they are different, right? When he asked me whether or not I think that soundness, right, and logical validity are distinct, right? And I agree that soundness and logical validity are distinct because I think that logical validity, right, and namely formal validity in some sense, right, is such that it's a requirement for soundness, right? Now, there's different senses people use of formal validity, right? One sense of formal validity that people might use, right, is a sense in which an argument is clearly translatable, right, into an argument that is formally valid, right? So take the Socrates argument, for example, right? Someone might say that that argument is formally valid, right, in the sense that there's a clear interpretation of that argument, right, in some sort of logic on which that argument has an inference rule, right, such that you're licensed to infer the conclusion from their premises, right? So I'll just say my view on formal validity and logical validity, right? So there's a sense of formal and logical validity where they're identical. I just outlined that sense, right? You can, search that up and, find that there's various different senses of the term at play, right? And even in the sense in which they're different, right, a logically valid argument is still going to have a formally valid translation, right? So if he's committing to the view that the argument that he gave is logically valid, right, he's going to be committing to the view that the argument that he gave is formally valid. I think this is really, really sad to watch. And the reason it's really sad to watch is because he was so confident in the initial ramble. He even moved to talking stick so he could get it out, that he won on that point. But now we're starting to slowly figure out that this is not the hill for him to win on. He's getting blown the fuck out on this point, right? And notice how he never gave the first premise throughout the entire course of the ramble, right? Now, remember what I said, right? What I said is, Apollo, don't give the first premise if you're my bitch, right? Now, what did he do, right? He didn't give the first premise, right? So I think, right, that someone might kind of come away concluding that Apollo is my bitch, right? And then with respect to, the sort of point he's making where, I want to hear the argument, right, so that it is the case that, logical validity, right, some arguments, if it's logically valid, it'll have an inference rule, right? I've already provided, right, an inductive argument, right, where the inductive argument, right, is such that there's not a counterexample to that principle, right? So there's not any instance, right, in which it's the case that an argument is logically valid but doesn't have a formally valid, right, instantiation, right? And furthermore, right, there's a bunch of cases like the case that you gave, right, that support the thesis, right, that all logically valid arguments will have, a translation in some formal logic wherein they'll have an inference rule, right? So here's what Apollo is questioning. And by the way, every single person is going to walk away from this thinking that you're retarded. And here's what you said, right? You said, what's the argument that if an argument is logically valid, it has an inference rule? Apollo, come on. I thought we moved past this years ago, right? I thought we moved past this so long ago. Remember when you used to come up with formally invalid arguments? Since we're talking about the past, right? You'd come up with these dog shit cobbled together invalid FOL arguments. Apollo, I thought we moved past that, right? I thought since then you would have at least gained 20 IQ points, but I guess I'm right. You did gain 20 IQ points. You went from 60 IQ to 80 IQ. You're still a fucking retard. Okay, this is the most incredible instance I've seen of somebody attempting to get a dunk in a conversation and it backfiring so hard. He even moved, as I've said, to talking stick because of how confident he was in getting the dunk, right? And nonetheless, he got fucking stomped on this point. I mean, he can keep on saying that I'm reading a script in this debate, but every single point that I'm making is so clearly pertinent and it so clearly addresses what he says that not a single person will walk away from this thinking, no, maybe he is reading off of a script. I just demolished every single point that you made. As you like to say, Apollo, you've lost all your credibility, okay? You've been educated in this conversation, right? No respectable person, as I've said, right, will think that you're even slightly competent after this, right? Now, let's try to get the question on the table again, right? And let's not try to get another dodge, right? And I'm going to make the same exact point. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Apollo stole this rhetorical tactic from me because he steals all the other rhetorical tactics. But if you're not my bitch, right, go ahead and give the inference rule of the argument, right? I've already given an argument that if an argument is logically valid, it has an inference rule, right? I've already given an induction in support of that view, right? And furthermore, right, give the first premise of the formally valid argument, right, that you have, since you claimed that the argument that you gave isn't sound in the sense that I had in mind, right? So let's hear Apollo prevaricate for longer and not answer the question.
God damn it, dude. That was just a whole bunch of gobbledygook. So anyways, just to respond to the actual points he made a while ago, where he was trying so hard to be rhetorical, whereas I'm not even trying that out as he is right now. So you said that but for any argument which is logically valid, there's a formally valid translation. No one is rejecting that claim, you dumb fucking ape. The idea was simply not that logically valid arguments would not have a formally valid translation or translation, not that the argument which would be formally valid, but rather I was basically making it clear that for a logically valid argument, that argument specifically, despite there being some possible translation of that argument, which would be formally valid, in and of itself would not be formally valid. So you fail to track that part specifically. You're so focused on reading off your little script, by the way, which has some pointed lines, with the exception of that one IQ line which you stole, by the way, from someone else, just to make it clear that you don't even know what's even going on in the conversation. It's completely clueless as to what's going on regarding the substantive points, regarding the idea that I made it clear that an argument can be logically valid without it being formally valid. And you're also misinterpreting the arguments I've given previously. You said the Socrates argument that I've given in the informal version has a universal instantiation rule in it. You're so fucking stupid. Like, unironically, you're a lost fucking cause. If I tell you specifically that Socrates is a man, therefore he is a part of the male species, or he's a male, that's not me stating, or that's not me establishing any sort of universal instantiation inference rule in the argument, you dumb fucking loser. You think it is the case that merely claiming that it follows from follows from P, that is Socrates is a man, that Q is the case, Q being that Socrates is a male, for example. You think that specific argument is something which is utilized, which is employed linguistically or argumentatively, an inference rule of universal instantiation. That in and of itself gives anyone a good enough reason to believe you're a tier 47 fucking debater who acts as if he's intelligent, who acts as if he's rhetorical, when you know behind the fucking mask you're put on right there, you really aren't. You really don't really know what you're talking about, don't you? Now, it's kind of going to be the case, if you actually did the spam insults to the entirety of your TED Talk, they would come off as more persuasive, they come off as more impactful to the audience's ears, but you talk so much about rhetoric, you talk so much about persuasion, you talk so much about charisma and all of these stuff. But when you look at the chat, for example, you're getting clowned again. I mean, people don't even like me. It was literally saying that you look like horse shits on the rhetoric. You're getting fucking pissed on in this conversation. Your arguments are dog piss, and your rhetoric is even worse than dog piss, unironically. And you sound as if you're like, I don't know, taking a jog or something, like you're losing calories mid-debate. It's really embarrassing when you're trying to weigh this fucking hard and trying to be rhetorical at the same time, especially when you get destroyed on the substance. Now, you ask me for the first premise of the argument that I've already given the first premise in this conversation. That's also in the recording, but you forgot again because you have a goldfish brain. You forgot that part too. I gave the first premise being, you dumb low IQ ape, was that for anything X, it is either mind dependence or mind independence. You even classify that's on the same recording that would be premise one. So you were aware of the first premise and acted as if I was dodging the entire time to play these Jedi mind tricks on the audience, and really and truly I was not dodging. I've already answered the question repeatedly, and you're trying to derail from the actual subject matter here of you fucking up on the point regarding you believe in the formal validity and logical validity are different, while simultaneously believing that formal validity is an indispensable condition for argumentative soundness, while agreeing that they are in fact different. Then you were saying that afterwards that by definition they are the same. So that was an open contradiction, which will be reviewed back on the recording to prove that you're a lowest tier dumb fuck debater. And the other thing which is going to prove even further that you don't really know what you're talking about is you misinterpreting the informal arguments I've given as an argument which is inclusive of a universal instantiation rule. You're fucking stupid, dog. You're an actual embarrassment, and no one is going to actually take you seriously in this conversation after they listen to this clip. They're going to look down as he's a fucking meme character unironically. So let's see if we're going to continue spazzing out again, which you've been doing the entire time, just spamming a whole bunch of empty calorie rhetorical jabs and not actually address the points there, just be a whole bunch of gobbledygook. Or maybe, just maybe, right, you might actually give an actual impactful argument, which is going to change the crowd's mind on you and make them believe that you're somewhat better than seats you're debating, okay? Let's see what you're going to do after this. Is it going to be more ramble, more insults, or less ramble, less insults, and actual more intelligent points? Which one is it going to be?
Yeah, by the way, Apollo is saying that, my strategy isn't very effective for winning the crowd over. So what we've done is we've actually pulled the crowd in his own server, right? Is Apollo doing well? And for some reason, 9 people voted no and 1 person voted yes. Isn't that interesting? Apollo, I thought you were winning the hearts and the minds of the people here. What's happening right now? And by the way, right before that, right, you made another embarrassing blunder. What you did is you claimed that I claimed that the argument that you gave in the side chat is universal instantiation. Now, I didn't claim that argument was universal instantiation. And in fact, I didn't even claim that the Socrates argument was universal instantiation. I said it could plausibly be translated into it, right? Where it could be something like for all x, m of x, right? And then you could have something like, and then you can just instantiate that on Socrates, right? And then you could have it such that your domain of quantification, right, is just all men, right? Or you could have it as universal modus ponens, right? Those are just 2 very plausible readings, right, of the argument. Now, notice how I didn't commit to the argument actually having either of those readings. So that's just another retard ramble. And then before that, right, we're just taking all the retardation in reverse order here, right? What Apollo did is it sounded like he was claiming, right, that, oh, well, no one's actually denying that the logical, condition for logical validity is it's being translatable, right, into a formally valid argument. Well, nice one, retard. Okay, so you were never disagreeing with the point. You didn't actually disagree with the proposition that you asked for an argument for, right? Maybe you think that the rational interpretation of what I said initially, or the most reasonable interpretation of what I was asking, right, when I was asking for the inference rule, right, is I was committing to the view, right, that logically valid arguments aren't such that that aren't formally valid, in the sense that he specified, aren't such that they have a direct formal logic translation, but they literally are in formal logic and they are formally valid in that sense. Maybe you're interpreting me as saying that, but no person who's not retarded would think that I'm having that interpretation, right? When I'm asking you what the inference rule of the argument is, right, that you gave informally, right, I'm not asking what the inference rule is in fucking English, right? I'm not asking what the inference rule is in something that's not a formal language, right? When I'm asking you for the inference rule with respect to the argument that you delivered, by the way, right, what I'm asking for you to do is to tell me what inference rule you'd be using in some logical translation of the argument, right? So it's like you just beat your chest so much throughout the entire duration of that ramble, but it's so easy for me just to like line your points up and just fuck them like one by one by one by one. Even the rhetorical points you're losing on. Holy fucking shit. And by the way, Apollo is making fun of the voice earlier, like he's saying, oh, you sound so nerdy. I'd rather sound nerdy than sound like I have fucking Down syndrome, okay? I'd rather sound like an intelligent person than sound like someone who has fucking Down syndrome, who's incapable of properly spitting out a fucking sentence, much less of having a coherent thought. You've been decimated in this debate. You've tried to run optics. Nobody in your own fucking server, by the way, that you specifically wanted to do the debate in, thinks that you're doing remotely well, right? You said, oh, the chat is clowning on you. The entire chat has been clowning on you throughout the entire course of the conversation. There's just been two Apollo retards, right, that have continually, one, by the way, not voting on the poll initially, but there's been two Apollo retards, right, two retarded Apollo goons beating their chest in the chat, but a vast majority of them, as it's been shown via the poll, by the way, think that you're doing fucking dog shit in this conversation. I don't know why you didn't run away and pretend that you had a loss earlier in the conversation, because the fact that you let the conversation go on further and you've let me expose the dumb fuck things that you're saying make you look even worse in the conversation. And as I've said, I'm going to keep addressing the retarded point he made about me contradicting myself, allegedly, right? Since, as I've said earlier, you know, he's going to keep on repeating the point, I'll just keep on responding to it, right? So what I was saying, right, when I said yes, that was me acknowledging what he was saying, right? I was saying yes a bunch during the conversation where I wasn't even answering a question, right? It's just because I was acknowledging the retarded things that he was saying, right? And I'm going to repeat what my actual view is on formal validity and logical validity, right? So there's a sense of formal validity people use where they're saying that an argument, right, if were to be translated into some formal language, right, would be such that there's an inference rule connecting the premises with the conclusion, okay? And then in that sense, there won't be a distinction between formal validity and logical validity. Both are frequent usages that you'll hear from people, you know, in the debate space, whatever. Or, right, if you mean something else by formal validity and logical validity, like you mean logical validity in the sense that it's not currently in some logical form such that it is formally valid, right? Then, if you mean it in that sense, I'm happy to say that they're distinct, right? That's my view on it. But in the sense in which they're distinct, you're dodging the question still, right? Because the charitable interpretation of my question, as I've outlined earlier, is what is the inference rule of the argument, right? And the charitable interpretation of that question is what is the you know, inference rule in some logic that would plausibly be translated in, according to which the argument that you delivered is formally valid. Okay, this has been a complete fucking stomping. And by the way, and I've already done this before, the reason you fall over the same tactics twice is because you're so retarded that you can't even remember them, right? The same tactic that I did before, right, was saying, don't answer the question if you're a bitch, right? And then what did you do? You did answer my question, right? And that's what I did again, right? Don't answer the question if you're my bitch. And what happened, right? You bitched down to me again. The theme of this debate is you being a bitch and you getting fucking bitched, right? Now, keep on prevaricating, keep on rambling, and no one is going to come away with the impression that you've done remotely well in this debate. Try answering the previous questions in the conversation. And by the way, I'm not giving you the fucking generosity of refreshing you. Just fucking answer them, bitch. You've been blown the fuck out.
Yeah, so notice how you just fail to even address the idea that it is the case that given your own definition of what logical validity, by the way, and formal validity, it would actually be the case that the argument given specifically would not actually be formally valid. So you've completely dodged and evaded from that specific point, whereas the argument that was being provided in the Socrates example would not actually be something which is emblematic of a formally valid argument, which would still be logically valid, right? I've given the definitions, I've given the semantical boundaries of formal validity, which would distinguish that specifically from logical validity, and not addressed the semantical distinctions, the boundaries right there. You also talk about something like me sounding like I have Down syndrome and so forth in the chat, thinking that you're winning. Dog, I'm not sure if you even realize this, but majority of the people who thought you're getting embarrassed were not even voting in the fucking polls. Sean is also one of those persons. Crescent is another one of those persons. But this fucking goes on. There are plenty of people in the fucking chat who are literally mocking you for breathing so hard, were literally making fun of you regarding the idea that you sound as if you're jogging or something. And most importantly, all the people who are literally saying, the vast majority of people who are saying that, Paulo is losing, literally hates me outside debating. One of these persons being, I don't even get onto the people bullshit for you because it's not even worth my attention in this debate, actually. So just to focus on a couple of things, you keep on trying to downplay or sugarcoat the concession you clearly made on the recording regarding the idea of you agreeing that it is the case that these two concepts are different, and then agreeing afterwards they're true by definition or they're identical by definition, which, by the way, no matter how much times you try to downplay the concession you made or try to sugarcoat the concession you made, it won't change the fucking fact you conceded at this point. Now, again, I would even address the insults and insult you back, but I'm not going to stoop down to your subhuman ape level and actually go insults back and forth whereas I read off a fucking script because I don't have to do any of that stuff to seem rhetorically dominant or to look rhetorically dominant or optically dominant and dialectically dominant in the conversation. You have to be doing that shit. You have to be using the voice change. You have to be using some fucking scripts that you have to read off to seem rhetorically dominant or optically dominant when you really aren't. Not to mention, so that part has been addressed regarding you conceding that point. The other part has been addressed regarding you making the claim in the chat, by the way. You said that the Socrates argument had a universal instantiation. Now you can say that you're talking about a different, you could say, formulation of the Socrates argument, which does not have the type of thing which would be like an inference rule, for example. It does have an inference rule. However, the argument that I've given, the Socrates argument that I've articulated in the conversation, does not have a universal instantiation. So if you're talking about that specifically, that would just be something which is incorrect. And if you're not talking about that, then you made a red herring again when you try to make that specific claim. Not to mention, I'll just re-give the formulation of the arguments I've given, right? Because an argument by definition is just a reason, a set of reasons or premises which supports a conclusion. The argument being specifically that the conclusion there would be, the conclusion there, who the fuck is that? Don't do it again before I mute you again. The conclusion of the argument is specifically that it is the case that Socrates is a part of the male species or something like that. He's a male. And the premise of the argument is that he's a man, okay? Now, in that specific case scenario, you're supporting the conclusion that he's a male with the very fact that he's a man. That's a synthetic fact about Socrates. Now, is it the case that such arguments is an inference rule? The answer is no. Even if you try to formalize it just based off the reasons given explicitly, it would not have an inference rule. It would go out like this. It would be like premise one, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, Socrates is a male. That specifically does not have an inference rule. Now, clearly, obviously, conspicuously, dumb fucking loser can translate the argument in such a way whereas the argument does in fact have an inference rule. You can do that for every single argument, you dumb fucking loser. However, it does not change the fucking fact that given the formulation of the argument, given though it's initially articulated, given though it's initially produced and generated in a given dialect, it will not be something which is formally valid. It's formally invalid, if you even know what that is, by the way. So that point has been addressed, and notice how you basically evaded the parts where I established that I've already given the first premise of the arguments, which you've acknowledged that they've given the first premise of the God's existence argument by you literally saying, yeah, the first premise previously before you started going your rhetorical rant, your rhetorical schizosession, you said, yes, premise one of the argument would be for anything X, it's either mind dependent or mind independent. You realized afterwards you had no proper objection to any of the premises, so you derailed the conversation to a rhetorical session where it's got beating the fuck up on, and then now you're going to try to go back to the substance, and even then that's going to be even worse for you because you're just not even existent when it comes to substance in the given debate context. So with that being mentioned, okay, so the validity point, you got demolished, and that point completely ripped apart in that specific point. If you're going to be talking about the other parts regarding the idea of there being an inference rule in the argument, there was no inference rule whatsoever in the argument, and not to mention the concession point, which have not even debunked the fact of conceded because it is a pretty obvious fact from anyone who's unbiased, from anyone who's not mentally challenged, that you did in fact explicitly concede the point regarding it being the case in one end that they are different, and it being the case in another end that they are the same by definition. And so I just want you to just track the fucking first premise, which I'm going to repeat one more time for the 8th time of this conversation, the first premise of the argument, which you yourself stated originally before you got because of a pea-sized fucking brain and you have dementia and you have meningitis, was me stating that for anything X, it's either mind dependent or mind independent. That should be the first premise of the argument, even if you want to formalize the argument. Now that I'm telling you the first premise, and now that you've already got it demolished on the previous points regarding the argumentation theory stuff and the validity stuff, Do you want to actually address the parts regarding the God's existence argument, or do you want to keep on getting blown the fuck out on the previous points regarding the idea of there actually being this sort of indispensability for an argument to be formally valid, for an argument to be logically sound, which is clearly and conspicuously incorrect?
Yeah, right now what we're witnessing is Apollo falling apart right now. What Apollo's doing, and maybe this would work if you had like a loud mic and you could overtalk me while I'm addressing this, but unfortunately you decided to make it talking stick. What you decided to do is to act as though I'm claiming that the argument that you delivered initially, right? Or that I'm asking for the first premise of the argument that establishes the proposition that God exists, where that argument is the argument you gave initially. I'm sorry. Remember, what you said is the argument that you gave initially is an argument that isn't formally valid, right? So I was asking for the first premise of the formally valid argument that establishes the conclusion, right? And then what you decided to say, right, is that it is the case that the argument that you gave is logically valid, right, but it's not formally valid, right, in this relevant senses of logical and formal validity, right? And then with respect to those senses, right, I'm happy to ask for the inference rule of the logically valid argument, because any logically valid argument, right, will abide by some inference rule, right, in the sense that I explicated, which is just that there's some plausible formal translation of the argument such that that argument will be formally valid. So once that we finally got on the table that you had a hyper uncharitable interpretation of the question that I put on the table earlier in the dialectic, let's actually get a fucking answer to it, okay? Instead of the endless dodging and prevarication. What you were saying earlier, you know, it sounded like I'm running in the debate. Yes, I am running in this debate, right? I'm fucking sprinting as I'm talking to you right now, and I'm fucking sprint bitching you. I'm listening to Mandarin audiobooks. I'm listening to fucking Bach and Beethoven on 2x speed right now. I'm fucking riding on a unicycle intermittently. I'm juggling 4 fucking copies of Naming a Necessity, and I'm still bitching you in this conversation, right? This is the easiest discussion that I've had my entire life. Holy fucking shit. Point after point after point of thing I've already addressed, and me fucking it again and again and again and again. Right now what I'm doing is I'm fucking firing squatting the dog shit fucking points that you made throughout the entire duration of your fucking ramble, dipshit. Right, so what's happened, just to kind of recap, is you decided to move to talking stick, right? What happened when we moved to talking stick is that you quickly discovered that you're a significantly worse speaker than me, right? And then what you've been trying to do is continually beat your chest and prevaricate, pretend that I'm losing optics, which wasn't happening. And then most recently what you've said is, oh, well, my supporters weren't voting there, right? If my supporters were voting there, then it would end up being the case that I was winning the poll. And then when more people voted, right, it still turned out that I was winning the poll. And this is in your server, right? The hilarious part of this is that you're struggling to win polls in your own fucking server, in a debate that you're actively losing in your server, in a debate that you actively decided to make talking stick so that you let my points get out uninterrupted, where it blows you the fuck out. I'm sorry, you're the architect of your own demise. You fucking constructed your own loss here. This is incredible, right? Now, what I want is an answer to the question, right? What you've done, right, is you've given the formal translation of the first premise. That's fine, right? So we have the formal translation of the first premise. Now, that's not answering the question I put on the table, which is what's the inference rule, right, with respect to the formal translation, right, of the argument that you delivered, such that it is the case that that argument is logically valid, right? And what we've gotten is no answer to that question whatsoever. All that we've gotten is you either discovering that I wasn't saying the hyper uncharitable interpretation of what I'm saying, and then nonetheless still dodging the question, or you repeatedly misrepresenting other things that I've said to try to get some sort of pedantic win, despite the fact that you're continually wrong on the fucking hyper pedantic points. You've been bitched in this debate. You're not winning rhetoric, you're not winning substance, you're not winning optics. So someone might ask themselves the question, what do you even have, right? You don't have the slightest bit of charisma. You don't have the slightest bit of intelligence. You're a fucking retard. So what even is there to salvage in this conversation? This has been like an ontological decombining of you. This has been me running lap after lap and lap around you, where you've gotten fucking dizzy and fallen to the floor, and I've started kicking you when you're down. The reason that you want this discussion to keep on infinitely going is because you understand the fact that every single time you continue, it gives you a slightly higher probability of doing well, but then what you're doing is you're rapidly discovering that the probability of you doing well for each interchange that we have is so incredibly fucking low that even if we keep on continuing it again and again and again after and again, you're not going to recover your dog shit performance in this fucking debate. Now, let's get an answer to the question, right? Let's not get a fucking dodge, right? I know you're a professional dodger, right? I know you go to the fucking dodging Olympics. I know you're the mayor of fucking Dodgeville, right? I know you're the fucking city council head of fucking Dodgeville, right? I know you wrote the book Dodging for Dummies and you fucking published it yourself too, right? Now let's get an answer to the question. What's the inference rule of the argument that you delivered, right? And since you're kind of confused on basic contextual clues, right, what I'm asking for is the inference rule of the formal translation, right, the most charitable formal translation of the natural language argument that you haphazardly delivered, bitch.
That was so embarrassing. So just to address a couple of things, as he failed to address anything in the conversation again, for at least like the 8th time in a row, and he just keeps on going, really and truly. So you talk about the idea of me just repeatedly dodging the specific point you're talking about regarding what's the inference rule. But guess what, retard? Again, if someone is given an argument which is logically valid, they don't have to establish an inference for them to give an argument specifically for why the argument they're given in a specific dialectic is in fact logically valid. So that specifically is a question which not only is it the case that it has no sort of, you could say, substantive relevancy to the actual crux of the disagreement in this conversation, but most importantly, I have established that the argument I was given previously was not even a formalized argument. So for you to ask for an inference rule in a non-formalized argument is completely retarded. Okay, I've already talked about this multiple times. I've already lectured you on this multiple times. I've already educated you on this multiple times. But that fucking goldfish brain, god damn it, holy shit, this is just really embarrassing. Just moving on from that point and going off to the other point specifically, you talk about, oh, I'm being pedantic and I'm misrepresenting IDs, blah, 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 blah. I'm not misrepresenting your point, you fucking moron, you fucking imbecile. If you're stating to a yes or no question that yes, it is the case that they are in fact different regarding formal validity and logical validity, and I take that to be you agreeing, then that's not a misrepresentation anymore. That's not a distortion of your claim. That's not a misinterpretation of your agreement. That is in fact an agreement, you fucking idiots. If you weren't autistic and if you weren't a social outcast, maybe you'd have grasped the bare fact that anyone with any normal social cues clearly interpret that as an actual agreement to the question, you fucking idiot. Now that you've agreed to that specific point, then you agree to the idea that they are identical by definition, then you clearly said that, okay, I wasn't agreeing. I was just like, no, bitch, you were agreeing. You realized you fucked up. You realized you got fucking pissed on at that point. Then you try to change your freaking mouth. You try to change freaking claims because you realize that you're completely outmatched on the intellect, making it intellectually crushed objectively. Now you talk about articulation, you talk about rhetoric, you talk about all of these stuff, things that you're clearly lacking in, things that you're clearly deficient when it comes to, by the way. The 144p quad rhetoric is not that convincing. You try to appeal to the idea of, oh, people vote against your server. You fucking retard. You think you mentioned that it's my server is going to get some rhetorical optical dominance or points, you fucking idiot? Majority of the people who joined this species don't even like me. Majority of the people, I could even count down the people right now who don't even like me in this fucking server, who joined the fucking beast. Majority of the people in the beast aren't even people who fucks with me, dog. So for you to make the claim that people who always say I lose debates, even when I get people to concede the debates, are the types of people who are competent vouchers is actually really hilarious. And not to mention, it seems to be the case that you just have this sort of like really poor attention span, whereas you only pay attention to the polls and not the actual comments in the chat. The vast majority of the people in the freaking beast, by the way, aren't even voting in the polls. They aren't even paying attention to the chat polls. And by the way, the vast majority of the people who hasn't even participated in the polls, by the way, literally said you're embarrassing yourself. People are literally saying that you're corny as fuck. People are literally embarrassing you currently in real time right now. And not to mention, you would perhaps come off as more convincing, again, if you didn't sound like a kid with a fucking extra chromosome who's a nerd to fucking skin the weed behind fucking a Discord screen. But you did not. You did not carry a voice change this time, so you just come off as far less charismatic. Right? And so not to mention, you lose in charisma, you lose in substance, you lose in argumentation, you lose in overall dialectical performance, and you got a fucking F score on your rhetorical card. So in other words, you should say, like on every single facet, on every single tenet in this debate whatsoever, you got completely dominated, crushed, eviscerated, decimated, and annihilated in this conversation. And not to mention, you have not yet addressed any of the concessions you've made regarding the idea of formal validity point. You have not addressed the idea that the argument I've given in natural language, even if you were to formalize it, you dumb fucking spook, you dumb fucking retard, I should say, would actually be the type of thing which is actually not formally valid. I've already explained this numerous times, repeatedly, and you just keep on talking about, but you're dodging. If you think for some reason that you get to demand answers to malformed, irrelevant questions which has no sort of productivity to the conversation, then you're even more stupid than I actually think, and that would explain why you lost the D1 previously. So again, it's not something which is necessary, even relevant in any way whatsoever, for someone to be named the inference rule for an argument to prove the argument is valid. What you can do instead is investigate the concepts of the specific premises, which, by the way, I've already established numerous times. I don't have a formalized version, and you just cannot track. I can establish the premises of the argument, and then from there on make the sort of supposed justified extrapolation that the argument would be valid given the conceptual analyses of the premises and the connection between the concepts within the premises and the conclusion, which would entail that the premises, if granted to be true, would entail the conclusion. So, in other words, asking for an inference rule is not even relevant. In majority of debates, by the way, majority of philosophical debates that you see, by the way, between philosophers, a majority of political debates, a majority of debates amongst actual high tiers, not low tiers like you, for example, would just spaz the fuck out, ape the fuck out, the fuck out, and manifest in BC on Discord.com, right? They don't ask for fucking inference to you dumb fucking retard. They're not gonna start off a conversation with, hey guys, what's the inference rule? You fucking retard. If you think for some reason that the normal average high tier debater has to fucking give an inference rule to justify the validity of the argument, then you are completely brain dead. You're intellectually malnourished, in fact. And not to mention, not only have I demonstrated the redundancy of your question, the redundancy of your malformed, irrelevant, completely non-productive question, but also I've demonstrated the idea that the previous points have conceded on, the previous points got fucked over on, and not to mention that you mistracked, misinterpreted, distorted, and prevaricated from the previous point, regarded the Socrates counterexample, which debunks the whole idea that formal validity is a necessary indispensable condition for there to be a logically sound argument. So on the overall points got fucked over on the rhetoric got completely bitched on, and not to mention, let's not even forget about the corner rhetorical jabs you try to pull off with your fucking script. Maybe if you're trying this hard, maybe if you're breathing so fucking hard at this conversation, maybe if it didn't sound as if you're fucking losing calories in fucking real time while debating me, you'd have come off as more persuasive, more rhetorical, impactful. But sadly, you have a nerd fucking voice, it's not give an extra chromosome, and not to mention just keep on stuttering while fucking is to say, accusing me of being the stutter box or whatever when you're stuttering a lot more than me in this conversation. But really and truly, I hope that you're able to acknowledge the redundancy of your question. I hope you're able to acknowledge the concessions you make. And I hope that at some fucking points of this conversation, you might actually give an objection to the points I'm given, to the arguments I'm giving for why God exists, instead of spazzing out every single time I get the chance to give a TED talk and bore the fuck out of every fucking person in the VC and give them a fucking snooze fest fucking ramble. I'm done talking.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you understand the redundancy
fucking
in
sexy.
saying I have an extra chromosome in the Down syndrome voice, right? So I guess what I'm sort of interested in talking about here, and I guess this is kind of wrapping up because I've dunked on you in this discussion. I mean, it sounds like the only sort of reply you have with respect to your optical point being just completely off, right? Is that, oh, well, pretty much everyone in this VC fucking hates me. Dog, it's your own server. Your defense of every single person voting against you in the poll as to whether or not you're doing well in the discussion, right, is in your fucking server. Nobody thinks you're doing remotely well in this discussion. It's fucking shocking to me. Guys, the reason my whole server is voting against me is because they all actually think I'm fucking retarded and they think I'm brain dead. That's an incredibly good look. Holy fucking shit. Now it sounded like the other point that you had. Yeah, so now that we have the soundboarder Apollo fans, right, being done, right, with respect to the soundboarding, right, I'm going to finish, demolishing the other points that you made. Right now, it sounded like the other points that you made were just you kind of rehashing other things that I've dunked on previously in the discussion, right? So for instance, the point about me conceding, right, I didn't change any of my beliefs with respect to any proposition, right? What I did is I clarified that there's two senses of logical and formal validity. And then with respect to one of the senses, with respect to those terms, right, it turns out that they mean the same thing. And then in another sense, they don't. And in either sense, you would have been dodging the question, right? When I was asking you what the first premises of the formally valid argument. Right now, it sounds like what you've been saying now is that, I'm kind of asking an irrelevant, malformed question, right? Since everything else hasn't worked, your remaining tactic is to say, oh, well, your question is irrelevant and malformed, right? So here's Apollo's view, right? Apollo's view is that the question, what's the inference rule, is a question that's malformed, and it's a question that only a low tier would ask. I'm sorry. The reason that like philosophers, for instance, don't ask for inference rules for arguments like that often is because of the fact that they're not so fucking retarded that they'll deliver so obviously an invalid argument like you did, okay? It's not even fucking necessary because they have background logical training, which you clearly don't actually have. You're never going to tell me what the inference rule is. You're never going to answer the question. All you're going to do is repeatedly try to repeat the same exact points that I've already dunked on earlier in the discussion. And the reason that you'll keep on doing that is because you've been blown the fuck out. You're slowly starting to internalize that you haven't done very well in this debate, that it's going to be an incredibly bad look, when people after this debate begin to, vote that you lost the debate. But yeah, I mean, that was a pretty good bout there. I mean, you can have the last word because I'm so fucking confident in this performance.
Yeah, bro, you're just really embarrassing. So just a couple of things, and now You talk about the idea of it's the case that obviously philosophers aren't going to have a logically invalid argument, but you do. Like, okay, so now you're making the presupposition right now that the arguments I've given is logically invalid, which is funny because you were asking me for the first premise, which indicates your lack of knowledge in the argument. So you're ignorant of the completeness of the arguments, you're ignorant of all of the premises, you're ignorant of the very conceptual foundation that the argument is trying to push, but you're making it very confident. A very confident, you could say, claim regarding the idea that the argument is invalid. That doesn't really make any sense to me, does it? Now, you talk about the idea of you not concede and you never change in your beliefs. It's as if you just have, like, it's really crazy. You must have some sort of, like, meningitis or something, because I've kind of like tried to repeat and slam this into your head on numerous different occasions. How you conceive it, I've already established and illustrated for not only your dumb fuck ass, but also the entire audience as to how you conceive it. If you make an agreement, if you say yes, are you listening, you slow boy fucking loser? I hope you're listening, because I don't feel like repeating myself 4 more fucking times for the track and comprehend and grasp and understand the basic fucking concept that this loads your fucking scumbag. Okay, if you have a question which is proposed by an interlocutor and they ask you, do you believe that they are different? And by they, I was referencing formal validity and logical validity. The reason I have to repeat myself so many times is because you keep on forgetting the point so many fucking times because you're retarded. If I ask you that question specifically, and your dumbass, your retarded says, yes, I agree with that. Then you say afterwards that they are not different and they're identical by definition, then guess what? That should be a contradiction, and therefore you're conceding either to the idea that the first proposition is false, or you're going to say that the latter proposition is false and the first proposition is true, which would entail the idea that formal validity and inference rules would not be an indispensable condition for an argument to be logically sound. I've given instances, by the way, for an argument being logically sound. The instance being the Socrates example, which you just keep on prevaricating from, you just keep on dodging from. And I know this, by the way, you stole my line regarding the dodgeball Olympics, too, by the way, that's my line, just to be clear on that. But if you want to move on from that specific point and focus on the Socrates counterexample, which demolishes your point, the previous point you made, I've established in this conversation that the case of the Socrates example, when you say Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is a male, that argument, that's an argument, by the way. I'm not sure if you understand what an argument is, but by definition, that's an argument, okay? Now, if you understand, which I hope you do currently, even though it took you over 30 minutes for me to actually understand this, hopefully, that that is an argument, then it would be the case that there's an obvious instance of an argument being the type of thing which is sound insofar as it is valid and the premises are true, even if there's no structure for the argument, which entails there not being an inference rule. The structure of the argument supposedly is not something which corresponds or coheres or is identical with an inference rule. It's something which is out of conformity with an inference rule, because the argument in just raw structure is just taking P, therefore Q. That's not the modus ponens argument. That's not the modus tollens argument. That's not the hypothetical syllogism. The list fucking goes on. It does not conform with any of the available inference rules we are aware of in formal propositional predicate logic. So you don't even know what you're talking about as it pertains to what determines the soundness of an argument. You don't even know the very foundational thing regarding what determines an argument to be sound. And you think for some reason that spamming the whole what's the inference rule in conversations in an autistic fucking manner, in an autistic tone, that the retard you actually are, is going to be something which is going to make it come off as if you're a smart, intelligent debater when you really aren't. And you talk about the philosopher stuff. No, the reason is why philosophers don't enter conversations by asking for inference rules is because they aren't autistic. They aren't socially inept and socially malnourished like you are, who thinks for some reason asking a malformed, irrelevant, redundant, non-productive question in conversations which don't require naming an inference rule is the type of thing which actually attacks the argument. Okay, if you look at Erik Sampson versus Lance Bush debate, for example, they're given informal arguments. They're not asking for inference rules, you dumb autistic virgin. That's not what they're doing, you fucking retard. They're not like, hey, Erik Sampson, what's the inference? You're not asking for that question, you dumb retard. What they're just doing is get into the substance. They investigate the reasons they have for the to believe, and then they themselves can actually articulate why they believe those reasons are sufficient or insufficient given the relevant evidential data pool that's available. Now, if you're going to make the claim, which you did, by the way, you made the claim, and I don't want you to run away from this, because it seems if you want to run away and end the conversation prematurely because you're getting destroyed completely and getting your intestines ripped the fuck out in this conversation, you made a claim that my argument is invalid. Now, if you're able to prove that claim, you can go ahead and prove the claim. But if you think for some reason an argument being absent of inference rule established is indicative of the argument being invalid, then that's bad evidence, that's dog shit evidence that does not follow, even given your own standards of what determines the quality of evidence. So given the argument for that claim, given the objections to the other claims you've already got destroyed on, and then maybe right then you might actually come off as optically better in this conversation, which I think is significantly low in probability, given how long you've gotten demolished at this point. So that's basically it. I'm done talking.
Yeah, I mean, that was a good conversation. Wait, why were you banning people that were voting for me on the poll? Why did you ban Lunar?
Yeah.
Is there no answer? What's going on?
I thought you were speaking, dog. Give your response. What's going on?
I said I would give you the last word. Are you retarded?
Oh, sorry, I forgot you tapped out the conversation because you're going to demolish.
Yeah,
That's my
because I
bad. Okay,
stomped
cool.
you.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, just pipe down, retard. Yeah, just relax.
Wait, you're
It's
gonna give
okay.
another closing?
It's okay. It's okay, son.
Wait,
It's
he's gonna
okay.
give another closing?
Yeah, you're crashing out again. What's going on? You're crashing out again.
This is such a good look.
Look at me, guys. I'm fake
glad you can
laughing
tell you're
because you're
being laughed
anally
at. That's the
destroyed the
That's the
conversation.
highest degree of social awareness you've displayed.
That shit was not funny, dude. Shut the fuck up. Anyways,
You
recording
being
is
able to
safe.
tell you're getting laughed at is the highest amount of social awareness you've displayed. Holy fuck.
Mm-hmm.